Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the HCD VidCast. Today, we're going to be talking about behavioral coding, a not as popular tool, but a super awesome one once you start learning what it is. So it'll be very exciting to talk about this one today. We're always recommending it, and it's a pretty cool thing to be able to do that's just not utilized enough. As always, my name is Michelle Niedziela, and I'm VP of Research and Innovation here at HCD Research, and joined by the lovely Kathryn Ambroze.
Hi, everyone. Yep, it is Kathryn Ambroze here, and I am the Manager of Behavioral and Marketing Sciences with HCD, and I'm going to let Michelle share a little bit about our company.
Yeah, so first, welcome back to those that are returning, and a big hearty welcome to those of you that are new. HCD is a research house that specializes in understanding how the consumer perceives, evaluates, and responds to different types of stimuli, which could be products or media, communications, whatever it might be that a consumer goes through. We use a lot of different types of tools. We call it applied consumer neuroscience because it's a combination of traditional methodologies in quantitative, qualitative type of consumer research, as well as psychological and neuroscience, and really bringing all those things together for a holistic understanding of consumer behavior and experience. We use this type of approach to look at anything from early stages of exploration in your research all the way through validation of prototypes or communications. We do this in product development all the way through marketing. And all our work can be done all over the world. We are global. It can be done online or in person, and either way, we can do it anywhere. Been in business for over 35 years, kind of doing this. So without further ado, let's hop right in to our conversations that Kathryn and I have about various topics. Today, it's going to be about behavioral coding. So we want to start with the basics because, as I said earlier, behavioral coding is an amazing tool. It comes from psychology, where literally you're just observing people's behavior and quantifying it. But it's something that's really not utilized enough in consumer work. In psychology, it was really used to sort of understand a naturalistic, an observation of what people do, so when a child plays, for example, exactly how are they going about doing that? Or when people are, whether or not they stop at a stop sign. I remember in an undergrad, one of the studies we did in Intro to Psych was go and observe what happens at a stop sign. If, say, someone is standing near the stop sign, or if there's nobody at the stop sign, how many people come to a complete stop? Just observing that is something different than asking people, right? So if you've done a survey and asked, do you come to a complete stop at a survey? Most people would say yes. But if you were to unobtrusively observe, where they didn't know they were being observed, then you might get a completely different understanding of people's behavior at stop signs, right, Kathryn?
Exactly. So I feel like behavioral coding, if you want to put it in layman's terms, it's really just people watching. And I think especially, I know I've spoke to people that live in big, larger cities, and they say one of their favorite things to do is just sit back and watch people as they're sipping on their coffees or something like that.
Yeah, you can learn a lot about people by just watching them, right?
Exactly. And I think you really hit the nail on the head by saying it's this non-invasive way to really understand how people go about their days. And that's kind of what the behavioral coding shows. It could be anything from really specific interactions, such as you can see on the screen here that we have the click subscribe button, and you could use that as an example for how long people hover over it versus something a little bit more explicit, as if
also hint hint, nudge nudge, wink wink.
Exactly.
Click subscribe here.
If anybody wants to hover over that subscribe button. But yeah, so it could be really used for something as simple as how many people subscribe to a channel versus a little bit of a larger scale thing where it's more explicit decisions, such as watching somebody, like you said, cross the street or stop at a stop sign. And really then also comparing behaviors. So who of that you watched?
In order to do that, the real key to behavioral coding is not just watching and then, say, writing down your thoughts about it. it's really getting a lot more systematic and a lot more quantified about it. So, maybe recording the number of times, right? Or the exact length of time. So you have a code, hence the name behavioral coding, so you set up sort of a lexicon of activities the person might do. So if we're talking about that stop sign again, it's, what defines a complete stop? Do they have to stop for 5 seconds, whatever it might be? And then you actually have to make sure that if you're going to code it as a complete stop, that they really did that, right? So it's putting labels or codes on specific behaviors. And that way you can count the frequency, you can count the durations, and quantify and compare later on.
Right. And I would just add to that, codes do exist on a spectrum. So, on a continuum. So you can have, like we had shared before, a code being something very explicit, which is sometimes it's also referred to as an object, where it's like you said, you're just kind of really watching to see how many times a person codes versus the idea of more of an implicit code. And I think in the next slide, we actually will be touching a little bit further along this idea of the types of behavioral codings that exist.
Because it's important to think that there are levels to behavioral coding, right? Because I think a lot of people think it is just very qualitative and describing what people are doing, and you can certainly do that. But when we're talking behavioral coding, the real value in it is taking something that is rather qualitative and making it quantitative, so that you can do real statistical analyses to show differences in behavior, differences in situations, or differences in products, for example, and really make something of it. So if you were to do something like the topographical coding, you're looking at how frequent the behavior occurs, so how frequently do people come to that complete stop? And then your intervening factor is whether or not someone's standing next to the stop sign, right? So you can see how you could really show the difference just on how often people come to a complete stop. More likely it happens when someone's standing there, right?
Right, exactly. And I think it also would be helpful to mention that data collection can be done through being live and watching someone, but it also can be done through the idea of an audio or a visual recording. So you can always, if you do choose to use the route of recording something, you could always look back to it, and it any way that you use either the topographical or the dimensional coding, there is a period of review to make sure that the information that you are looking at is being gathered correctly and coded correctly.
So often in psychological research, it's done live, where the coder is right there observing the behavior, maybe with a mother interacting with a child or something like that. But they also do the recording so they can go back and make sure they didn't miss anything. Right. So that's one way that the recording can be used. But also when we think about the dimensional side of recording, of coding, that's that you can actually do things along a dimension, and that's easier done in a video, because if you want to gauge the intensity of behavior, sometimes this can be distracting to a live coder, right? So if you're instead able to use a video and show, say, how long an actual thing happened, or maybe how loud they were, anything like that that's going to have dimensionality to that particular code, then having the recording is really a lot more beneficial.
Yeah, and like most things that we discuss, the way that you approach coding, it really depends on what you're looking for within the certain tasks or behaviors that someone's doing.
Absolutely. So now the other really important thing about doing behavioral coding is that it's observational. You do not want to interfere in the behavior that's happening. So when you think about shopping, for example, they often do like shop-alongs, right? Where the person's asking the person questions as they're shopping through the store. This would not happen if you're behavioral coding, because just the act of somebody interrupting is going to change the behavior. So you do not want to have the person coding be obtrusive on the behavior at all. You need to let the person naturally do what they're doing. If it's shopping, then we're just watching, right? From video or from afar. You also want to get people comfortable, right? So an acclimation period. So if you bring somebody in, for example, a lot of the behavioral coding research that was done in psychology was really done on observing children, right? And so if, you're bringing children into a different setting, something that's not their really natural environment, then you do want to make sure that they're adjusted to that environment, right? Because otherwise you're not measuring their natural behavior. You're measuring their sort of novel behavior to a new environment. Same thing if you are going into a classroom, right, to observe, you being there in the classroom is a distraction,
Mm-hmm.
right? So again, thinking about that naturalistic setting, making it as naturalistic as possible where you're not, interrupting anything or influencing any of those behaviors.
Right. And to go along with that, it's acclimation periods are really a crucial part of it, because um, if somebody is staring at you and, staring at you intensely, that's actually, utilized as a form of creating stress sometimes in some so you want to
Yeah.
completely avoid that and find a way to keep things as, like we have written here, naturalistic as possible. And furthermore, the information that is gathered through behavioral coding it's not always just to see a final reaction, but it's to really review the timeline of an
Yeah.
experience in its entirety.
Yeah.
So,
Because sometimes it's the order, right? Because it's not
right,
even the frequency or the intensity of it, but what did they do first? you know?
exactly.
So again, you really don't want to interrupt those patterns, because it can be very difficult to really interpret that later on, because then what are you really measuring?
Right.
Technical difficulties. So we've talked about this a little bit from an academic standpoint or a psychological standpoint with children in classrooms and things like that. But this works really well if you think about how it's used in consumer research too. So whether it's people shopping in a store, like I said, and you're observing their behaviors, or maybe it's using a product. Could be, you can imagine someone washing their hands or applying makeup or dishes, or washing their baby. We're going to talk about an example here, a case study for meal preparation. So, there's lots of different types of meal kits and recipes and all sorts of things that are out there. And this is an example of a behavior that you can observe. So, Kathryn, if you want to talk more about it.
Sure. So I'm sure everyone's pretty familiar with meal prep or companies like HelloFresh, for example, has been my go-to with, being a little bit more nervous about going into public places. So I've been taking advantage of the idea of delivery. And this research basically was done with the idea of being able to see where improvements could be made with instructions, as well as the materials that are included, to make sure that the overall experience is comfortable, is enjoyable for the person that's cooking, whether they be novice or more familiar with meal prepping and this idea. So the
And the
behavior.
reason that would actually be really helpful to a company, say like HelloFresh or anything like that, or maybe, a shampoo company or a body wash company, would be if you can identify the specifics of the activity that may lead to frustration or, some sort of tension, right, within the process, then that can help you design a better product, right? So to correct certain things, and identify things that people at the end of the experience, if they were to just answer these things on a survey, they may not be able to recall exactly what happened or identify the things that led up to the tension or the problem, right?
Exactly. And often when you're thinking back to an experience, you might be there's a possibility that you might misremember something, or it might not even be that you misremember something, but your attention was focused on a different component of whatever that experience was. So for you to get that really that overall experience, the behavioral coding is really beneficial. And with this particular case study, it was really looking at what are those setbacks, what are things that can be improved upon to make this experience, this overall cooking experience, pleasurable and simple. So as a way to do that, there was 3 GoPros that were used and set up. So like we had just mentioned, you want to make sure that there's an acclimation period. So there's people, when they're being filmed, sometimes at first they feel a little bit nervous, but and a little bit extra aware that there's, a GoPro and you're like, it's going to be smiling or something more than you would normally. But after a couple minutes, we did see really started to become comfortable and just really focus in on the task that they're trying to complete. So there's 3 different angles. There was a participant view of them going about cooking, as well as the kitchen view and a counter view. So you could really get an overall picture of what was happening in that kitchen without actually having a physical observer in that environment. So if we go to the next slide, you can see that what was shown is that there were participants, all the participants were able to complete the task, but some participants did not follow the instructions correctly or used incorrect ingredients or maybe changed the sequence that was shared. And that created different types of setbacks, as you can see here, some more than others. And it was really broken down by different behaviors to show where were the points of most contention, where were the points that HelloFresh or whatever company, delivery company, could improve upon.
And you can really see here that it's quantified, right? So we're really getting numbers that can be, graphically represented and then also statistically analyzed, right? So you can see some real effects when you're doing this that can be very meaningful.
Right, exactly. And just for a little bit of context, the 2,000 seconds, it comes out to roughly about 33 minutes. So it didn't take anybody the full extent of time. It wasn't they weren't over promising with the recipes that they were sharing, saying that it would only be about a 30-minute experience where it took somebody an hour. So by meeting those expectations, those are other things that we want to consider. And the results, when it was paired with, if we go to the next slide, when the results are also paired with what people were sharing in their survey responses, you were able to get both their behavioral coding results as well as their what they were explicitly experiencing. And it showed that the recipe instructions might be unclear because people were quoted saying that they had to read the instructions a couple times, or that there was a little bit of confusion because a lot of things were happening at once, as they do with cooking. So it gave some areas of need gaps for improvement that were really needed when creating further development.
And it can really help you target those opportunities, right? Because if you were just doing the qualitative and getting these verbatims, then you wouldn't have that behavior to go back and say, it's here or it's here, see really across a larger number of people where things seem to be hicking up, right? So, again, as with all the methodologies that we ever talk about, they should never be done in a vacuum, right? So if you're doing qual, we always recommend you combine it with something else, or if you're doing quant, you want to combine it with something else. If you're doing behavioral coding, again, you want to combine it with like a survey or some qualitative questions after they have the experience, because it really helps bring it all together, integrate it.
Exactly. And I think also what's also really helpful with this case study is that we were able to see that there were areas where there was improvement needed, but then additionally, the ingredients that were excluded from the kit, so say there was like salt or pepper that was just assumed you'd have around your house, that didn't affect the amount of time it would take somebody to cook. So that was also a way for the company to validate, okay, we don't have to invest in buying little packets of salt and pepper. Right. People are comfortable having those items in their house.
Yep. Yeah, so it's a great example of a use of behavioral coding. So if you're interested in doing behavior coding, we do have some tips. As with everything, there are pros and cons, and you have to be able to talk about it. As we always kind of mention, if you're talking to a company that's talking about any sort of methodology to do anything, if they can't tell you any of the drawbacks or the limitations, then you should really be cautious, right? Because while any of these methodologies are great, behavioral coding is not intrusive. You can use it on challenging populations like those that you do really need to observe their behavior and they may have trouble expressing what's the cause of certain things, maybe chronic pain patients or whatever it might be. You get that timeline of the experience. It can be conducted anywhere. You can do these things, using GoPros and different devices like that. And it integrates really well with other things, right? So it helps really like elucidate the other questions and approaches you're doing. But there's some things you got to think about, right?
Of course, right. So this, when you're trying to develop your experiment or your research, it is very time consuming and complex because just like you wouldn't want to take somebody else's, take somebody else's shirt or something like that and put it on as your own. You want to create your own code to really fit your experiment, to fit your outfit. And the other thing that we've touched on in this is the idea of reacting to being observed. So it's that idea that there needs to be that acclimation period. And if you are doing in-person behavioral coding, you do want to make sure that the observer, the coder, is being as discreet as possible to really not affect how the person is reacting to the stimuli, whatever that may be. And this is just more of a cautious reminder. It's not a negative thing, but you do want to be really well thought out to make sure that you are coding for the right things and that you are considering whether it be duration or be frequency, and really focus.
So what's really going to be important, because while you can use video, right, and you can record and go back and code for things, you really don't want to code too much or too little. There is a real good balance there that's going to be helpful and not overdoing it,
right,
and still be informative, right?
Right. And I think the last 2 points here kind of follow what you were sharing with. You don't want to be have an exhaustive you don't want to overcode, and that also goes along with the idea of making sure that you do take the precautions to make sure that you're coding for the right things and that you are taking into account any type of reason that the behavior might be influenced while you are coding.
And sometimes that involves, if you are doing video, look at a couple of the videos, right? And get an idea of things that are going to be important or things that you may have missed in your original set of codes. Because you can always go back and add them if you have the video. So you can always go back and redo some coding if you decide, later on after watching a few videos that you forgot some sort of code, right?
Yep. Exactly. So I think with those things in mind, we're very happy that you stuck around and connected with us. Feel free to reach out through either LinkedIn or Facebook or we on YouTube, obviously, and we love chatting with you. There are white papers available if you would like further research about this, and our blogs, of course. I enjoy writing on them. We have many people contribute to the blog, and as well as our Twitters. So please check out both at HCD Research Inc. and at HCD Neuroscience for more up-to-date research that's coming out in consumer neuroscience.
You can also reach out to us directly, but also take a moment to like this video and to subscribe so that you can get updates whenever we have new ones come out. Also, feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions for us. Leave a comment, or maybe just to say, hey, you guys are awesome. We like to hear that too.
We always love compliments. We also love criticism. So
we love it. Bring it on. Bring it on. All right. So everybody have a great day. We'll catch you next time for the HCD VidCast, where we'll talk about yet another exciting topic. So until then, have a great day.
Awesome. Take care, everyone. Bye.